With one of the greatest rogues gallery in all of comic books, Spider-Man has had his share of deadly foes to battle both solo and as they team up into sinister partnerships. One of those villains, one of his earliest villains, and a proverbial thorn in Spider-Man's side since 1964, is none other than Maxwell Dillon, a supervillain named Electro. Let's talk about him. First, thanks for watching JLS Comics. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. I do upload videos just like this every week. Alright, let's jump into our story. Maxwell Max Dillon was born in Endicott, New York to Jonathan and Anita Dillon. Jonathan, an accountant by trade, had trouble keeping his jobs, and so the Dillon family was always moving around. Max, the boy, wasn't able to establish himself at any school and carve out any meaningful relationships because they moved so much. He had a stutter as a boy and was so much of an outcast that he wasn't even bullied. No, he was ignored. He was a nobody, and his abusive father, ultimately a failure, left him and his mother when Max was just 8 years old. This left Max to be raised by an overprotective, overbearing, and harsh, draconian mother. Max had wanted to go to school to become an electrical engineer, but Anita told him he wasn't smart enough for that. And because of all this, his mother gave him an inferiority complex. Max didn't feel loved, didn't feel like he was good enough, and didn't feel connected to anybody. He always felt like he had to prove to others his worth to be accepted. Instead of graduating with an engineering degree, Maxwell took on work with an electrical company as a lineman. One day he was out with his manager and another pole man named Harris, who became trapped at the top of a pole and was needing to be rescued. So his manager asked Max to help, but Max said, "Nope, I don't work for free. How much of a bonus are you gonna give me?" So his manager said he'd pay him more, and Max went up, lowered Harris down, and that's when Max was struck with a bolt of lightning. The spool and the live wire tension wires around him surged with electricity, and this massive amount of voltage and energy flowed right through Max's body, charging up every single cell and atom of his being. But this did not kill him. Quite the opposite. The energy surge mutated his cells, turning him into a human living capacitor. And this capacitance power allowed Maxwell to generate, store, and modulate this very same electricity within his own body. He decided to make money off his new power, so he first joined the Steuben Circus, becoming a freak show attraction that could do things like light up a light bulb that was stuck in his mouth. But it was humiliating, and he hated it. So with his new powers and his inferiority complex, and now something to prove, Maxwell thought the best way to prove himself would be to turn to crime, to be a villain. To do so, he'd need three things: a costume, a secret lair, and a name. And so he made his iconic green and yellow costume and took on the name Electro. He used all his money to buy a rundown house to convert into an electricity lab, and that was his lair. And then to test his nascent powers, which were weak because he didn't know how to fully use them yet, he went to rob an armored truck full of gold, and he stopped the guards by tossing electric shocks at them. He also began to steal power from the power company and equipment from Stark Industries, and he borrowed money from a thug to buy more equipment for himself for his lab. And seeing his potential, Magneto approached Dillon to ask if he'd join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but Dillon declined the offer. The next day, the thug who he owed money to pulled a gun on Maxwell, demanding repayment, but Dillon killed the thug. That was his first ever victim. Emboldened by this and continuing with his criminal career, Electro robbed a bank and was able to climb the building to escape by using the iron beams within the walls and his electrical charge as magnets. But some people saw him climbing the wall and said, "Surely that means that's Spider-Man in a new costume." So Electro decided to steal a safe from J. Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle offices. J. Jonah Jameson was also one of those who thought Electro was Spider-Man in disguise, his confirmation bias in full effect, as he was the one saying Spidey was a menace, and he published an article on the front page of the newspaper saying just that. Spider-Man swung in to try to stop him, but the shock stopped Spider-Man. Electro tried to break a bunch of criminals out of jail, something he'd do multiple times over the years. Spidey swung in again, having learned from their first encounter, now wearing rubber boots and gloves. So Spider-Man and Electro fought at the jail, and Spider-Man was able to defeat Electro, but shooting water at him from a fire hose attached to a water main caused Electro to short circuit. So Spider-Man took off Electro's mask to see who he was, but he didn't recognize Max. He was still a nobody. In the second issue of Daredevil, the Yellow Devil from Hell's Kitchen shut down one of Electro's chop shop. And later in the issue, Electro heard that the Fantastic Four were on the way to Washington, D.C. to receive a presidential medal, so Electro decided to break into their headquarters to steal their scientific secrets in order to sell them to a hostile nation for a fortune. Electro was able to ride the electricity up to the towering Baxter building by using power from the electric cables set in the walls. And this just as Daredevil was strolling by. So the two fought, and Electro was able to defeat Daredevil, who was immediately put inside a rocket ship and launched into space. But Daredevil made it back to Earth, and then he took a horse and a helicopter back to the Fantastic Four building, where he gave chase to Electro, ultimately stopping the high voltage heel from stealing the Fantastic Four's secrets, along with help from the fire department, who once again short-circuited him with fire hose water. In Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, Electro joined a group of villains, and together they called themselves the Sinister Six. It was him, Vulture, Mysterio, Sandman, Kraven the Hunter, and Doc Ock. Their goal was to each confront Spidey somewhere where their powers would be maximized. Electro, the first to attack, battled Spider-Man at a Stark power plant, though he was again defeated. He then went after the first family of comics again, the Fantastic Four, at the wedding of Reed Richards and Sue Storm. After this, Electro teamed up with Stiltman, Gladiator, Matador, and Leapfrog as the emissaries of evil to fight with Daredevil once more. In a turn of events from their first encounter, it was J. Jonah Jameson who hired Electro to go after Spider-Man so the two could fight on national television and the world could see Spider-Man as the menace Jameson thought he was. But Spider-Man defeated Electro and Dillon became ashamed and his inferiority complex kicked into high gear. So Electro left New York City and headed to San Francisco, wanting to get away from the city and from Spider-Man, and that's when he ran into Daredevil again, who also happened to be in San Francisco with Natasha, the Black Widow. Next, Electro joined a villain named Sagittarius to form an evil defenders team, which brought them into a street fight with the heroic defenders and the defenders for the day. In Spider-Man 187, Electro captured a boy named Barry Starr and held him hostage at Indian Point Power Plant. Captain America and S.H.I.E.L.D. had cordoned off the area because Barry was bitten by a rat and had the plague. Cap grabbed Electro, but he was shocked, so Spider-Man swung in to save the day since, it's Spider-Man's book and all. In Spider-Man Annual UK, Electro teamed up with Scorpion for a story called The Electric Sting. In Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man 39, Electro showed up in a garage in the slums of New York's Bowery to demonstrate his power and join the Frightful Four. Electro and the Frightful Four lured Spider-Man into a trap where he was captured, and the Trapster, formerly known as Paste Pod Pete, put on his costume to infiltrate the Fantastic Four's Baxter building. Electro was able to defeat the Invisible Woman by creating an electromagnetic storm around her and then carbonizing the air to imprison her in a sheaf of hard electrocarbon atoms, solidifying the air. Trapster sprayed Reed with his paste, and then Electro zapped him with a superconductor, and he blacked out for a moment as the real Spider-Man crashed in to fight the Frightful Four. Spider-Man stopped Electro again, this time with a kick to the head. He was then taken to Rikers Island and put in a custom prison cell, and his body was wrapped like a mummy in special non-conductive bandages, while Waldo's remote control arms tended to his needs through plastic IV tubes. The problem was that one of the food cartridges was metal, and when it got hung up on an IV tube, that was the connection and all Max needed to break free. He immediately sought to suck all the power from the entire city as fuel for his vengeance, and now he was able to skate along the power lines and create an electrostatic ramp to ride, sort of like how Iceman rides on ice bridges. When he fought with Spider-Man again, he told him that the months that he spent in the Rikers prison gave him a chance to refine his powers, and he could now siphon off electric energy from anything. Spider-Man had to retreat, and he went to make an insulated spider suit, and Electro said that Spider-Man would have to die in order to save the citizens below. And so Spider-Man took Electro's arm, and zap! The killing shot came, only Spidey's rubber suit protected him, and he was able to fell Electro with a mighty uppercut. And again, Max went to prison, this time in a supervillain cell at Project Pegasus. Later, as Spider-Man tried to be an Avenger, the likes of Blackout, Moonstone, Rhino, and Electro were broken out of prison, and so the Avengers and Spider-Man had to stop them. In Falcon's miniseries, Falcon fought with Electro, but Falcon defeated him as well, and he was again remanded to Project Pegasus. But later, Tony Stark decided to overhaul Rikers Island Prison, since that's where they kept supervillains like Electro, and they kept Electro in a rubber room with electrostatic bars in between Sandman and Grey Gargoyle. But Doc Ock broke them all out of this newly renovated prison, only he didn't get far because he was back in jail again for his break from a paddy wagon in Amazing Spider-Man Annual, the issue where Peter and MJ marry. He fought with Black Suit Spider-Man in the streets, who was able to stop him by once again short-circuiting him with water from a fire hydrant. Back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, Shocker tried to recruit Electro into Chameleon and Hammerhead's organization, but he turned them down and instead went back with the Sinister Six, although he was once again captured, but this time he was sent to a prison for superhumans called the Raft. But when the Wizard broke free, he set Electro and a whole host of other villains out of their cells. He then showed up in the new adjectiveless 1990s Spider-Man title for a story called Revenge of the Sinister Six. Vulture, Sandman, Mysterio, Electro, and Hobgoblin, and he teamed up to get revenge on Doc Ock. Later, Electro showed up at a supervillain hangout called The Bar with No Name. Electro showed up after that again to fight Spider-Man during a story called Invasion of the Spider Spider Slayers, where he'd broken out of another jail and was stealing diamonds. In Spider-Man Unlimited, Electro joined Mysterio's new team to form the Sinister Seven. They were going to come together to fight with Spider-Man's clone named Kane, but Kane disappeared, and so the Sinister Seven disbanded and Electro went back out on his own. Now on his own, by himself, Electro still wanted to prove to himself and to the world that he was a somebody, that he mattered. He wanted to be seen. So he went up to the top of the tallest building in New York City and plugged himself into the biggest sign there and sucked all the power from the entire city, the whole power grid. He caused a total blackout across all the boroughs. The only light was him. He wanted the city to remember the day the lights went out, the day Max Dillon lit up the night as a white-hot star. But he ended up sucking too much power from the grid, and he was trapped in an energy cage, and he had to ask Spider-Man for help. And in a moment where Spider-Man revealed that he too felt like an outsider when he was younger, Electro decided to step down, now realizing Spider-Man was the only person who understood part of who he was. After a bit of time passed, Electro went to an assassin that worked for a guy named the Rose to power up again with a massive jolt that would, quote, geometrically increase his personal electrical field, end quote. And so he became the all-new, supremely powerful, and supercharged Electro. His power increased 1,000-fold, and he became one with the electrical field that surrounded the entire planet. He was now Electro, the living dynamo. Now instead of riding electricity like a skateboard, he could shoot it out of his body so hard that it would propel him as if he were flying. Spider-Man tried to stop him with a fire hydrant water trick again, but now Electro could superheat the air, and he turned the water to steam, and then he was able to disrupt electrical impulses in Spider-Man's head, and he said he wouldn't fry Spider-Man's brain if Spider-Man begged Electro to not kill him. Spider-Man then made a new suit called the Union Suit, his Electro-proof suit, and teamed up with a mutant, an X-Man named Nate Gray, to stop Electro. Electro wanted to blast the central switching generator for New York, which would blow up and destroy all 5 of New York City's boroughs, and in the fight, Spider-Man had Electro dangling by his webs, but Electro didn't want to surrender again. He didn't want to go to jail, so he zapped the web and fell hundreds of feet and plunged into the Hudson River. Electro then joined up with yet another iteration of the Sinister Six, this time called the Sinister 12. This was a nasty team formed by Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, and during this time period, Electro was also questioning his sexuality. 6 months after House of M, Electro was hired by a Skrull who'd taken over Electro's body and a Savage Land mutate named Brainchild to cause a massive breakout at the raft. Electro, though, was quickly apprehended by the New Avengers for doing this. In Sensational Spider-Man, Electro teamed up with a team called the Exterminators along with Chameleon, Rhino, Swarm, Will-O-the-Wisp, Scarecrow, and Molten Man. Electro was then seen in Hammerhead's hideout during Civil War just as Iron Man and S.H.I.E.L.D. raided the place on a tip from Kingpin seeking to arrest unregistered power beings. In New Avengers 48, Wolverine confronted Electro in an alley and beat the crap out of him, leaving Dillon bloody and unconscious right on the concrete. By the time Electro showed back up again, he had an updated look. He was now more battle-weary with lightning scars and battle wounds and maybe some scrapes from Wolverine. As writer Mark Waid described his situation, his powers were now becoming uncontrollable and resulting in his body breaking down into literal disfigurement. His mind was breaking down now too, as his touch was lethal, and he was now even more an outcast, even more alone than he ever was. He was the very thing he feared becoming his whole life. So to combat this, Electro formed a Power to the People, and Power to the People attacked Wall Street's stock exchange. It was another villain named the Mad Thinker that came up with a way for Electro to channel his energy and who worked on a cure for Dillon. In the inevitable fight with Spider-Man, Electro used up most of his new energy, and he was captured and put in prison where he ran into Chameleon and Sasha Kravinoff of the Kraven the Hunter lineage. Electro was then with Sasha and Alexei Kravinoff during the grim hunt for the sacrifice of Maddie Franklin's Spider-Woman. And later, Spider-Man had Osborn's baby, and Electro and his whole rogues gallery were chasing him to try to get his goblin blood. In a book called Young Allies, the heroes thought Electro had a long-lost daughter named Aftershock who was part of a terrorist network called the Bastards of Evil. And so this led to him battling with Gravity and Firestar, after which he convinced them that it was impossible for him to conceive a child because of what happened to him when he got his powers. In ASM 648, Electro rejoined the Sinister Six, where they fought with a group called the Intelligentsia. And the Intelligentsia was like an evil version of the Illuminati. It was comprised of some of the greatest minds in the Marvel Universe, but they were evil minds. After this, Electro started helping the Sinister Six rob from the Fantastic Four and from the Intelligentsia, and so in the fight with the Intelligentsia, even after Mad Thinker was able to shut off Electro's powers, Electro defeated him with a punch, a raw attack. It surprised him. Later, the Sinister Six fought the Avengers, and Thor threw Electro into space. But when he came back down, he had AIM reverse his power to generate protons instead of electrons, and he wanted to get revenge on Thor for throwing him into the sky, but Superior Spider-Man defeated him before he could. And this is when Superior Spider-Man trapped Electro as energy and held him in his underwater laboratory. Mind you, Superior Spider-Man is actually Dr. Otto Octavius, Doc Ock, in Spider-Man's body. The purpose of this was for Doc Ock to collect all of his former allies to make a new Sinister Six, which he would call the Superior Six. And this Superior Six was created, and they broke free of Doc Ock's control and rampaged across the city. It was also around this time that Electro had joined up with a lady named Francine Fry for his misadventures. At Francine's apartment, she tried to kiss Max, but Max's powers killed her. Later, the villain team was stopped by Spider-Man and Cela Burke, a hero who called herself Sun Girl. Electro was still embarrassed at what had happened with Doc Ock, and once again he needed to prove himself, so he tried to do what he did at the Raft with another prison called Conway Penitentiary. But instead of breaking everybody out, he lost control of his powers and killed everyone. This is when he teamed up with Black Cat with the promise of taking down Spider-Man once and for all. Around this time, Electro had a fight with the Punisher while in Los Angeles, California, and Punisher, a guy with no powers but a big arsenal, was able to defeat Electro, and this humiliated Electro once more. So Electro and Black Cat broke into a Parker Industries building to steal Parker's anti-Electro technology. Black Cat fired up the machine, which also powered up Electro, and that's when Spider-Man and Silk showed up to stop them. So Black Cat overloaded Electro with power. It didn't kill Spidey or Silk, but it did manage to depower Electro, and so they were able to capture Electro, and he was again remanded to a correctional facility. Rhino broke Electro out of jail, though, with help from the Jackal and Lizard, and the Jackal was going to be the one who reignited Dillon's powers, although Electro changed his mind until he saw that the Jackal had resurrected Francine Fry, and Francine convinced Electro to go ahead with the Jackal's procedure, and as she leaned in to kiss Max, Francine absorbed his powers and killed him when he was burned from electrocution, and so Francine became the latest to take on the name Electro. She's been a force to reckon with ever since. Where he does show up next, rest assured, we'll be there to talk about it. Until then, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this every single week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.